The most important and shocking part of technocracy is that it's not a political system. It was defined as an economic system. So it's a big difference here. Now, obviously, economics and politics are closely related in some sense. But our political system in our country, our republic, based on a Congress, based on a Senate, and a House of Representatives, executive branch being separate from Congress, the judiciary being separate from both. We have a political system in our country that appropriately supports the economic system that we know as free enterprise and in kind of a larger sense as capitalism. But the economic system is different than the political system. And technocracy was defined originally in the 1930s as an economic system, not as a political system. These scientists and engineers who started this eschewed the political system in our country. They didn't like politicians. They felt they had no need, that they were blundering idiots trying to control and make policies for technology that they did not understand. In fact, they blamed the Great Depression on these same politicians because they felt that they had done things with technology and society that resulted in everything falling apart. That was a false read, by the way, on their part, I do believe, but nevertheless, that's the way they felt back then. And there's a general feeling of that today, that the political structure of this country is immaterial, the Congress is irrelevant, and that the scientists and engineers should just simply do what's right in their own eyes to manage and control society at large. And it's also important to remember that when we talk about the economic system versus political system, that technocracy is a global movement today. It's not just centered in America. We have a particular political system in our country, but other countries don't have our system. For instance, China still has the vestiges of a communist dictatorship, a totalitarian dictatorship in its country. And yet, China is now being classified by many writers as a pure technocracy. They're going in that direction of an economic system based on the original technocracy that we find in the 1930s, an economic system. In fact, technocracy as a historical system works better in a totalitarian system, form of government, than it would in a democratic or republican form of government that we have here in America. So looking at it as an economic system is covering the globe with a common interest, and yet there are many different political systems and systems of governance throughout the world that aren't the same. It's not the same as ours. Europe is different, Russia is different, China is different. The countries in South America and Africa and so on have quite varied forms of governance of the people. There's an economic coup that's taking place in the world today, an economic transformation. And the people that are bringing this to us want to control society, kind of like a factory or a machine floor where you have a factory making something, and the engineers have designed the factory and they're going to manage every little part of the factory from their perspective as a scientific project. Crazy as this sounds, it's social engineering on steroids. Technocracy, as originally described in the 1930s, truly was a utopian system of operation. We have an example in literature of the book Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. Scary as it was, science fiction knowledge that that described a scientific dictatorship where every little facet of life was managed down to the last little detail. And what people don't appreciate is that book was written in 1932. The only thing on the world stage at that point that even remotely fit that book was technocracy, and he was looking into the face of technocracy when he wrote the book. He got his inspiration from it. Doesn't mean it's going to turn out exactly that way, but you hear today in the media, and you hear people talking about it just in passing. Oh, it's a brave new world we live in these days. Well, they don't realize how true that is. The brave new world that they're talking about was looking straight into the face of technocracy in the 1930s. And those ideas have stuck, and they're striking a chord with people today. They're not sure why, but those that have read the book say, oh man, it sure looks like Brave New World to me. Well, as a replacement economic system, the differentiator was that they wanted to do away with price-based economics altogether, and that means capitalism. They wanted to destroy capitalism. Well, actually, they didn't want to destroy it. They just believed it was already dead. The Great Depression was a very dark time. Unemployment was through the roof. Food lines, extending around blocks. Finding a job was just next to impossible. A lot of hunger, a lot of just hard times And so a lot of people really believed capitalism was dead. And the thing that differentiated technocracy from anything else was that the scientists and engineers believed that the perfect economy would be based on energy rather than on money and supply and demand. This is a very difficult concept for people in America, or probably anywhere, to get their head around, because when you talk about doing it with money and pricing everything in energy, it just doesn't make sense. It goes snap. But here's an example of how it might work. They intended to forecast the amount of energy that was going to be produced in any given period, like say a month. They would forecast the energy to be produced in that given month in the economic system that was being looked at. They would divide that energy by the number of people, and they would devise a system of energy currency, energy credits, that would be passed out, kind of like food stamps, to everybody in society. And you'd have those energy credits to spend during the following month. At the end of the month, your energy credits would expire if you had not spent them, so it's, spend them or lose them. And you'd have to wait for a new allocation for the following month, again based on another forecast of the energy that's going to be produced in that period. Then on the other hand, how would you buy goods and services? Well, you go down to go down to a clothing store to buy a shirt. Technocrats, the science and engineers, believed that they would be able to price that shirt in terms of the energy that it took to make it. So you have cotton grown in Egypt, you have diesel goes into a tractor, you have the cotton gin comes along and has to spin it into thread, and then it goes to a garment maker in Sri Lanka, another ship involved, and eventually it ends up in your store, wherever your town is, in a department store, and you go in and buy the shirt. Theoretically, there's you could add up all the energy it took to make that shirt. That's what you'd pay. And wouldn't be based on supply and demand at all, just be based on the amount of energy it took to make that shirt. So this is completely otherworldly to our system that we understand as free enterprise, supply and demand, and so on. And it also requires a management of the economy that we do not appreciate today at all. We don't have anything like this in today's economic world. Now, there have been attempts to manage capitalism in different ways, by the way. I'll say that the Bolshevik Revolution, for instance, when communism really got underway as a social experiment, the government attempted to manage the capitalistic system. But in both cases, it was still a price-based economy. It was still supply and demand, even though the government said, we'll manage the economy. We'll tell you how much supply there's going to be. We'll tell you how much demand there can be. And when technocracy came along, the whole concept of all of those things were out the door. It was an altogether different ballgame. In fact, if you were to meet a card-carrying technocrat in the 1930s and call him a communist, you're liable to get into a fistfight with them because they hated communism. They thought that communism was a complete sellout, it was just another iteration of capitalism, and people trying to manage and manipulate capitalism to control the people. Technocracy, they thought, would do away with that altogether.
Only on Johnny Bigger.
Well, freedom and liberty are closely related topics. And some people would define freedom as just the ability to do whatever they want to do. And I suppose there's merit in that, as long as it doesn't hurt anybody else and you don't, intrude on another person's rights to freedom as well. But I think in a larger context, freedom in a society has a little bit different concept than a freedom as an individual. We certainly need freedoms as individuals. The Constitution and the Declaration of Independence guarantees it to us. But in a societal sense, freedom and liberty have the context of being able to operate together and live in close proximity to each other, to monitor the affairs of society in such a way that people have a maximized number of choices on what they can do with their lives, what they want to do with their lives, the right to self-determination as either a family or as an individual or as a group of people, without tromping on the rights of other people and damaging their property, damaging their ability to do what they want to do. But liberty and freedom are things that are ingrained in the Constitution of our nation. They're ingrained, I believe, in our heritage. We've had lots of close calls over the decades where it looked like it was going to be curtains, yet it wasn't, and we're still here.